If I find my way home, yeah. If I find my way home, yeah.
We're in? We're ready?
Yeah.
We're on the bus?
Mm-hmm.
Kirra, welcome on the bus.
It's a pleasure.
It's our first one in studio, first one in New York. Little jitters, little new studio, new space, cameraman a little late, but it's on the bus nonetheless. Really happy and excited to be up here, and I'm excited to talk to you.
It's an impressive setup,
Well, you had your coloring book going. We have Diego Orlandini,
right?
Winwood coloring book right here. Therapeutic.
I already feel like I've accomplished something today.
I like to tell people it's not all me because I have everybody joining in, but when I open it up, people are like, you did this? You colored all these things? And I'm like, no, I cannot take full credit for all these. It wasn't me. I didn't fill all these in, but
Well, I'm sorry for my coloring ability. As I said, there's a reason I take photos.
that's the thing. No one's going to know it was either you or I'm going to take all the credit. Not a thing at all. And how long have you been in New York?
7 years now.
7 years.
3 more years and I can claim to be a New York City local.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a thing?
Yeah,
Is
that's
it
a
10-year
thing.
rule?
10 years. I'm going to have a huge party.
And you come from Australia, no? That accent hasn't worn off yet.
It's softened though. Everyone can still hear the accent in America, but I go back and they think that I have a strong American accent. So, I'm hanging in there though.
Keeping it strong,
Yeah.
it strong. Now, for some reason, I get mistaken for Australian. Even with I don't really think I have an accent, but a lot of people are like, I don't know where in Australia you're from with all my travels and all the places I've gone. Like,
Right. Well, that makes sense because Australians are maniacs and travel all over the world. So it's probably more a comment on who you are and your traveling.
You guys make drinking not fun.
Yeah, I know. I had this conversation with my husband. He was like, "Oh, every culture think they're a drinking culture," and then he visited Australia, and he'll be like, "We're having beers for breakfast." I was like, "It's a brekkie beer, of course."
Eggs and breggie with the brew. It just makes me sick.
Yeah.
All English-speaking cultures. I mean, just a whole different way and a whole different idea of partying.
Right.
And just way it's accepted in the culture. But
Right. I bet you saw a lot of that in South America.
South America, Europe.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's just
We're a plague.
not really a plague. It's just it's what we're even coming here to talk about today, which is what is accepted in different cultures,
Right.
what's taken in, what's okay,
Mhm.
and especially with drinking, and we're talking about partying, or just
Right.
any just social norm. Anywhere else in the world, it's just like, oh no, you dropped off at the pub in the UK, and at 16, you go have a drink, and you come
Yeah.
home, and it's no big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
We got DDs, making sure everybody's gonna get home safe.
Right.
And the whole idea of, Me Too now, women having too much to drink, a
Right.
guy having too much to drink, someone getting taken advantage of, everybody
Totally.
under the influence. I mean, I like to think, does it happen that much a big of an effect outside of the U.S., or is it really just us and we're just savages in our own way, in our own right?
Drinking?
No. Sexual harassment. Is it just that
Oh.
much publicized?
No, it is that much of a thing. Since I've been exploring sexuality, women come to me with their stories, and I've been really shocked at some of the stories over the last few years that people have been telling me. But even for the women, I can hear it's almost like the first time they've voiced it to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the realization sets in as they're talking to me that it wasn't okay. So I definitely think there's been this acceptance of like that's just what happens to women, and I think part of the Me Too movement is, women realizing that it's not okay, and I think it is more prevalent than we realize.
Yeah, it's completely tough, even from a guy's perspective and a dude's perspective, to really understand. You hear, you listen, but sometimes it just, it doesn't resonate, or you don't fully grasp. Even when someone's, letting their heart out, letting you know where they're coming from, or telling you a story about time they felt just completely distraught and completely not themselves, and either, you don't fully grasp it because it's a completely different gender, completely different sex, and, it's hard to relate.
Right. I mean, it's all about the power dynamic. And that can be regardless of gender. It's just who holds the power and
Mhm.
makes someone else feel powerless.
Yeah, but that's deemed kinky in the other light. In the other.
Right. If it's consensual, then it's kinky.
Ah.
Right. But one of the big things is that I think there's been this whole conversation about it's a learning process or it's an opportunity for education. But I would like to challenge that and say that people know what consent is and people know when it's not there. I think it's like a whole lot of bullshit when people talk about not knowing or needing more education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And was it that, or what is that got you into these questions of dating and sex life between whether it's millennials, people in general, and all around the world, or in the U.S. itself?
Well, I think I initially got interested in exploring connection and dating and sexuality when I first moved to the US and I didn't know anybody. So I used Tinder as a way to make friends. And I was very successful at it. Some of my closest friends in America I met on Tinder. And so I was curating a show about modern romance, and everyone had a different take on what modern romance meant to them. So I decided to do a project which I called Tinderella, and I documented my experience using Tinder. So it was a series of black and white portraits, and I made social commentary about how we connect in a digital world. And it was at the time when it was only just becoming socially acceptable to meet people through online connections. So that's what initially got me into it, and I found that it was a really interesting topic, and that's what led me to projects like The List.
What year did you start that? If we're talking about when it actually got pretty accepted to start going on meeting people online.
Right. I think that must have been around 2014.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's about it.
Yeah.
I don't think I started using these things till 2013.
Right.
And
It was interesting. In Australia, it was still not accepted. They thought it was a sex app, and so when the story was published in Australia, I got really slanderous press because they thought I was just this look at this slut who's moved to America who's documenting her experiences, and that was harsh to hear.
No, it's what was I going to go into there? It's lost that thought right there.
No worries.
But yeah, I started using it, and then you started using it. And when I started using it, I really explored it in terms of, like you said, meeting people all around the world.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
really met, friends, connected with people, and whether it's to go live in a city or whether you're going to go travel to a city or explore a city, it really has bridged and opened up the ways, and also enhanced our social gratification as human beings to say how fast you can connect with somebody. And again, it doesn't matter on what level, as a friend,
Right.
what kind of relationship or intimacy or whatever, it's just so much faster now.
Right. I completely agree. And I think I really love dating because how often, unless you're on a podcast, but how often do you get the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with a stranger and really sit down and hear about their life and their experiences? I think that can be a really powerful experience, and the fact that these the dating apps open you up to people outside your social circle could be a really positive thing. So when I released Tinderella, I know that at the time it was very popular for the press to talk about this dating apocalypse and the youth of today and what are they doing. But I actually think that it is what you make of it, and especially when you travel, it can be a really powerful tool to meet people.
And I remember now what I was going to go back into, when you were talking about the Australian press. I mean, you got a lot of, your words taken away as well. I remember there was one story when I listened to your give a lecture
Right.
or a talk.
Yeah.
And one of the columnists out in Australia just completely took everything away. I mean, it wasn't just him, but I mean, your website got hacked.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for a year, you just couldn't figure out what was being used and said against you.
Yeah, for sure. That was a really difficult process, and it makes me really wary of what I read in the press, because I'm not talking about they changed my words. They completely made up entire interviews when they didn't get the answers that they wanted, and that's a really scary experience to have, and to realize that, I mean, you could be what you take as fact could be total bullshit. I know that's a really big discussion politically, and it's a current conversation, but just from my personal experience, that was very frightening.
And I don't think it's initially the journalist's fault or the guy who's doing the story, the guy or gal who's, researching you, editing you. I've had not as in-depth of a problem with that, but, oh, wow, I just did this interview, college basketball, they're excited about me going to play in the NCAA tournament against somebody else that's from South Florida.
Right.
We talk on the phone for like an hour, 2 hours, and he takes out like just 3 lines from the conversation that made me just sound like, yeah, I'm excited to play. Yeah, basketball's fun. It's going to be cool.
Just a douchebag jock talking about sports.
Yeah. And I just look like an asshole on there. It's like,
that's great.
we're going to read this.
Yeah.
I like that they think they're going to think more of me. They know me more better, but it's like,
right.
Come on, man.
I think we've lost a lot of journalistic integrity with the internet. Everyone's just concerned about clickbait and getting the views. I think they're under a lot of pressure from the editors, and they have to produce like 20 times more stories than they did in the past. So I think it's a combination of all those facts. And the other, I'm an easy target. I felt that I had no means to really defend myself. What was I to do? So yeah, it was somewhat of a scary experience. And as a woman talking about sexuality, I do feel like I am a target. Yeah, I get hate mail and.
Really?
Oh yeah, when I released the list, I got hate mail from someone on Instagram who told me I was the reason HIV still exists. So
That what still exists?
HIV, yeah. My sexy photographs, like I'm responsible for AIDS. Apparently,
That's a lot to handle.
that's a lot on my shoulders right there.
But I mean, I love the book. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
I sat down and read it with a girlfriend last night. It was
Right,
I read
yeah.
it out loud too.
Yeah.
It was, for me, really, really, really interesting just to hear that other perspective. Like, oh shit, maybe I've been, in one of those my past sexual partners relationships. Like, did I ever go in that situation?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Really to expand on those questions you try to ask. What is it? The main questions right here. How many people have you had sex with? What would they say about you? And is there one more?
Yeah.
What would your life look like as seen through the eyes of your former lover?
Yeah. And that really is the intent of the book. It is a story, and you do have that double narrative where you get to hear my experience of interviewing all these people, plus a story about his life and the women that contribute to that story. But really, at the end of the day, it's about the reader reflecting on their own stories. And that's what it's all about. It's about the stories you go and the conversations you have with your girlfriend, when you read it together and what it makes you think about. That's the intent of the book at the end of the day.
Yeah, the infamous K. I mean, can you go in and explain, like, you got this list?
Right.
People still keep track of their sex list? I mean,
Yeah.
I stopped doing it in college. But I mean, I was doing it, like, on my hand, like 1, 2. And
Which you can't count on 2 hands. Like, you really have to
can't.
write it down at some point.
I mean, when you're trying to think, like, okay, this is 11, that's 21, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, I guess after I finished Tinderella, I started thinking about what my next project could be. And I got this call from one of my girlfriends. And she had found her boyfriend's list. And it was 3 pages long, named and numbered. And her concern was that she recognized some of the names on the list. But what interested me about the whole conversation was that each name represented a chapter in his life. And I thought if you could piece together all the stories, what would his life look like? Kind of like this patchwork version of someone else's life. So I started exploring the idea, and I ended up having a friend donate his list, which he had kept in the form of a spreadsheet. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, first name, last name, and all contact details. So it was a unique opportunity.
Anything else in there? Did you have, like, a shooting percentage?
No. No, there was no other commentary other than the names.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. I was fascinated that you know, it was I think in the forward from K himself. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to read too much. Can we read it on
No,
there?
no,
That's
go
cool.
for it. Yeah, absolutely.
The list wasn't kept to help me learn from experiences or mistakes. It was kept to continuously boost. It wasn't kept to continuously boost my ego, and it certainly was never kept with the intent to turn into an art project. In the end, the list is just a diary of a very specific part of my life experience, my sex life. It's just a way of being able to keep track of how I've changed as a person based on each of these unique experiences.
Mm-hmm. And that's the only time you hear from him in the book.
At all?
Yeah, that's it. So then for the rest of the time, it's a story told by the women.
And I was interested in your take and like your parts of the stories, and I had
Right.
questions. Like I had to go back, especially with the first story.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "What was your involvement
Right.
in the first story?" I was like, "Did you guys do something? Did you hook up? Did it not happen?" I was like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure."
No, the like I can reveal this. The whole book starts with a threesome that I have with one of the girls on the list. So she reached out to me, and I was initially concerned about becoming involved in the story and my personal bias as this role of the narrator that I'd adopted. But it was kind of like throwing myself down the rabbit hole. And I'm really glad for the experience. It was my first time with a woman, and I photographed the entire experience. I was like stepping in and out. So that's how the whole book starts. So it's a punchy beginning.
Yeah, I've had to go back. And like, not for the action. I was like, I'm just not sure what happened here.
Right.
Is that what happened? So,
Right.
I mean, that was just mind blowing right there, and I
Yeah.
loved the way you placed the storyline of, you know, how you introduced the girls, what girls you brought in,
Mm-hmm.
and then even introducing, you know, Kay's first girl at the
Right,
end, mixed in
right.
with the story of that last girl he had a relationship with in L.A. It's
Right.
like, oh wow.
Yeah, definitely. I think the story takes you on a journey. So each chapter really is connected to the other. And I think sort of kind of like halfway through the book, it's really easy to vilify him. And as this kind of like this douchebag womanizer, and then you get to number one, and it makes you question everything. And then, especially the way that it ends, you know, like by the end of it, you may or may not feel a completely different way about him.
It was well put and well said.
Mm.
What did you think at the end of that book, or at the end of that interview? And did you go through number order when you to go out and find these girls?
No, so it's presented in the order that I met with the women.
Okay.
And so in that way, I think I mentioned before, you get that double narrative where you are able to hear my journey as well as his at the same time. No, I mean, I already knew the central character. So I am biased. You know, I bring in like already my own experiences with this person. So sometimes like the girls would be talking, and you know, I would, you know, definitely disagree. I think there's number 23. Especially, she's like clearly very emotional about it, and I, you know, I really disagreed with like what she had to say, but that's all part of it, you know. As these stories are clouded by bias and emotion and regret, so it's not necessarily a true story. It's just a version of events.
As an artist, like, how do you, you know, swath through all the different biases, the different stories, the point of views,
Right.
to come to, you know, a final conclusion?
Well, it wasn't my place really to judge the stories. It was my place just to interpret them and put them out there. Yeah, even if I disagreed with their story, or it's not my place to say what's right or wrong necessarily. I want the reader to come to those conclusions for themselves.
And Kay,
Yeah.
what do you think about him, you know, now?
Well, he's actually in a really serious relationship now, and they read the book together, which I think is fascinating. And it makes me question, like, did he learn something about himself through doing the experience? You know, going like, it was, you know, he went through like kind of like the ghosts of his past, and to consider perhaps he's right, the things he did right, the things he did wrong, and at the end of the story, he ends up in, you know, this very like happy, loving relationship. That's not part of the book, but I wonder if it was a learning experience for him.
Mm. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself in the book. Poor Kay.
Did it lead to a conversation with your girlfriend?
Yeah. I mean, it was really, she was like, is this you? Are you sure this book isn't you? And I was like, no, it's not me. I swear, this is not about me. This book is not me at all. She's like, are you sure? This sounds like stuff you do and you would do. That was more of the conversation, especially towards the end when we're reading the stories.
Right.
And she's like, she kept looking over at me with a face like a smirk, like,
right.
Are you sure?
That's hilarious. I love it.
Not much on her side or her point of view, you know, but, you know, like the things I've mentioned to you about, you know, hearing that different perspective. And, like, I was really, not getting flashbacks, but looking back to, you know, different encounters or situations I've been in.
Sure.
You know, relatable stories from, you know, different stories that were told in the book. And it was like, oh, wow, you know, how it could definitely be seen in a light.
Right.
And, you know, also I think it's always important to just, not just to maintain relationships, because people are people.
Right.
But my big thing in premise is do not be surprised about what human beings do, because we're capable of anything. And, you know, there's a certain level of shock that a lot of people have, whether it's, you know, politics, to reaction to what people say, to, you know, things that people do. And just like, there's a little bit of filter you got to put on there. You know, we're human beings. Don't be too shocked when something happens. You know, don't be too shocked, especially if you know a person, you know what they're capable of.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kay's a pretty normal guy, and sometimes he's really romantic, and sometimes it borders on sexual assault. So, you know, every human being has the capability for good and bad. You know, and it's about being human.
And that's what all this digital media and social media, you know, it allows us to connect with people we would have never imagined, not just imagined, but had the capability of connecting with around the planet, around the world. However, it's kind of still diminished, or we haven't been able to keep up with the rate it allows us to connect with. You know, there is the certain number. It's a theory. Can't think of it, but it's the idea that our brains are only the capability of having 150 intimate relationships. So if we only have 150 intimate relationships, people, you know, not just sexually, people take the word intimacy and they over and brandish it. But the idea of just knowing somebody, connecting with somebody, being able to know who they are and share experiences with them is a certain level of intimacy. And so when we come from these hunter-gatherer tribes living in small villages, that's as many people there were. And now, I mean, you know, you look at your Rolodex, your phone, your contacts, your Facebook contacts, your followers, you know, we're talking millions for some people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the dark side of the applications and the websites, is that people become disposable and develop what I refer to as social ADD. So, you know, that amazing person you met last week could be already forgotten about in a few days' time.
Yeah, the idea that you could just throw someone away.
Yeah,
you know, like the idea of like, oh, there's another person. I'm not worried about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that takes away from people actually getting to know each other and actually opening themselves up and letting someone else into their life.
Right, for sure. It creates all these shallow connections rather than sitting still with one person at a time. And that's really up to the individual to monitor that. You know, I think that, as I said, I think it could be a good opportunity, but it really is how you use it.
So do you think these things are the devil, negative in a complete way?
No.
Dating social media apps, of course.
No, not at all. I think that social media can be a trap because we become obsessed with curating our lives and creating a version of our lives that we think other people want to see. And I think that that's a real threat to authenticity and mental health. So that concerns me for social media. As far as dating applications, as I said, you have to have some accountability for your experience. So it really is how you use it, and keeping in mind that, the interesting part is creating
Excuse me.
the intimate relationships, is
Mhm.
like digging deep with somebody. That's what fascinates me. The shallow connections are boring and not fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, you could see those in your Tinderella experiment that you had back
Right.
then. I mean, there was one guy.
I know what you're gonna say.
I mean, I'm not knocking the guy. I mean, he was honest. He
Right.
said what he wanted.
Right.
I think it's almost better when people are more out there and open to say, hey,
Right.
listen, this is what I want. This is
Mhm.
what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
I think it's a problem with both sides. Like,
Yeah,
hey, listen, there's nothing that this guy is saying
Mhm.
and this guy. I mean, I don't know. Well, you probably say it better than I was. Just like, hey, listen, I'm a young stud,
Yeah.
got a large cock. I'm just trying to fuck right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's hook up. And you're like, dude, I'm just trying to have a conversation right now.
Yeah. But it goes both ways. I think that women are far more sexually aggressive now because they can be like online. So I think that's been like some of it positive. So it's not just men. I think like we've opened up this entire conversation about women just wanting sex, and that's not something we've talked about so openly in the past.
And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a positive thing if you're a dude and you're out, hey, listen, people are like, oh no, she's a slut, she's a whore, she's going to say.
Right.
Well, listen, dude, I mean,
Yeah.
what do you want? You know, you want a girl who's going to be out there, want to tell you what you want and tell you
Right.
that she wants this now? I mean,
Right.
sounds like honesty to me.
No, totally. And I think like women have suffered from that for a while. If you want sex, you're a slut. If you don't want to have sex, then you're a prude. So we're kind of screwed either way. But I think that's all changing now, and people are becoming more accepting. But there's a long way to go.
Now, do you have a favorite dating app? I know you're married now, but when you were single and running around,
Right.
did you have a favorite? You were like, oh no, I get better quality from this one. Ooh, Tinder's just gone downhill right now. Let me get on J-Swipe. You literally have like a buffet
Right.
for if you're looking for dudes, you're looking for girls. It's,
Right. Well, I actually still date women. So I'm on Tinder, and I have great success. Like I meet really awesome people. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's my dating app of choice.
Ah, nice.
hmm It's called Queer Tinder, and I think like the culture of dating women is very different to if you were swiping for men.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, just dating women is a completely different experience, and what they're looking for and the types of dynamics they're after are different.
Well, it's the same Tinder, right? We're just talking about, like, I think it's just, we were talking about different, opening up the different application.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just looking for women, just looking for men, looking for
Yeah.
both.
Uh-huh.
Is there more of like a field now that you can open up on there? Because I know with all LGBTQTA plus, I mean, there's something for everybody these
Yeah,
days.
absolutely. No, I think they still have they just have men or women. They're the options, and then just however people identify within that group.
I've been out of the game for a while, so I mean,
Right.
I gotta ask people like, what's going on in these things?
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating world out there.
Because I mean, in this book, I mean, you even talk about where Kay has met some of these girls, and I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't know this one happening.
Oh yeah, he's really big on happen. I think he's also like a kind of a quiet guy.
Mhm.
He's somewhat introverted, and so I think that he really excels in online applications, and I think he's able to be a version of himself that perhaps he's not in person,
Mhm.
or perhaps that he won't show in person until later in the relationship. So he can be more aggressive. He's wittier. And I think he has more success through using dating apps than meeting in person.
For those who don't know what happening is, it knows your GPS location. So whenever you're moving around town, you're walking towards one way, and someone else who's using the app crosses your path, it doesn't connect you automatically, but it says, hey, this person crossed your path, you like each other. And this could happen in a car, you could be walking around town in New York, obviously.
Right.
It's got to be going with the subway. I mean,
Right.
your field's got to be crazy the way it opens up.
Yeah, I haven't actually been on Happen, but it sounds super fun. You can be like that babe that you locked eyes with on the train. You can like open your app and check. Maybe she's on Happen.
It's like
too.
the bridge for Craigslist misconnections right there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it is. I think it sits at that cross section of like meeting online and like offline dating, as I as I call it.
In the subject of Craigslist, like, where do you see the evolution? If we're talking about, it's gone from Craigslist to,
Mhm.
How people met and who the people they could meet. Once upon a time, it was a person in their village, a person in
Right.
their city, in their neighborhood. And I mean, now, I can go on Tinder and I could say, hey, I want to go, I'm traveling to Uganda. I just want to, see what the talent is like in Uganda, and I can connect and, you know, potentially marry somebody. Where do you
No,
see this
absolutely.
going?
I have a girlfriend who does that actually. So she travels all the time, and she already has like 3 or 4 dates lined up in the location before she even lands, which is cool. Like you get like a local's insight into wherever you're traveling. You get to make friends, maybe more. But I think that um, the future of sex tech is headed more in the sense that our connections won't become like face to face anymore. So I'm really interested in seeing how we achieve fulfillment through applications and things like sex dolls and that kind of thing. I think that's the future, and that's how it's going to head.
So just less person to human to
yeah.
human?
Less human to human. And I think, when you think about how strongly people feel about possessions and how people are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with face-to-face contact. I mean, I don't know about you, but I hate it when people call me on the phone now. Like, how dare you talk to me on the phone when we could text about this? And so I think that trend will only continue. And people will be able to receive comfort from their devices.
No, I'll probably be riding this to the grave. I mean, I have this whole podcast and radio show to share conversations with people, so I'm going to ride out that conversation
Right.
like phone calls.
Yeah.
I can be on the phone with somebody for hours,
Right.
talking, getting to know what's going on, what's
Right.
happening with them, where they've been, what they're doing.
Right.
I mean, I enjoy that, really personal relationship with, whoever it is I'm connecting with.
I agree, but for your listeners, they're having a completely different experience. There's no pressure on
course.
them to contribute to the conversation at all. So, like, they can listen as a passive observer,
Well, I mean, according to analytics, I know when they turn off, too, so I know when they stop listening.
It's true. It's interesting. I hate talking on the phone, but I still really love, like, face-to-face conversation. And that's kind of what my whole work is about. I love, like, meeting a stranger and, like, having a conversation and getting really intimate very fast. And I had that, experience with the list.
Mm-hmm. Well, with, like, sex tech, let's even take it back, after Craigslist. You think about, like, Match.com was that first real big online dating.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And I mean, it was interesting because it was like, okay, let's ask certain questions. And these questions are going to